All right, today we are going to work on working on a lantern project. So I have one really giant example that I made a couple years ago. This one has all four sides that have been designed with the same pattern. I've got the loop up here to hang, so that's the lantern actual part. And then for this one, I actually also made a pedestal base, it's very dusty, to put my lantern on, so it actually sits like this, okay? This is where I could put my candle right on that area, and then it would glow up through my lantern. So there's one example of an idea that you could potentially use for your project. I'm going to demo two different ideas. One of them is using what's going to be a cylinder. Okay, so there's my cylinder shape. The other one is going to kind of mimic that design I just showed you. I'm going to use this arched point for my second version. So I'm going to do the cylinder part first. This one is the easier of the two. So if you find yourself crunched for time or just want to stick to something that's a little bit easier, this is the one that I would do. So to get started, I've made my template. So my template is a piece of paper. This is the exact size of what I want to have my cylinder look like. So if I set it up, you know, that's what the size is, probably about 4 inches tall, a couple inches in diameter. Okay, so I've already pre-rolled slabs, so you don't have to watch me do that. And what I would do to get started here is take my cylinder, or sorry, my template, and lay it on top of my slab. And I decided for this, if you can kind of see on the top of this, I drew an organic line. I like maybe that rippled effect on the top of my lantern. And I'm actually going to just kind of thin that out, the top of my lantern, so it's not super thick and chunky at the top edge, and then keep some of the thickness down at the bottom edge. So here's what I'm starting out with for this slab, okay? The next thing I'm actually going to do is add some texture. So I've got this texture roller ball. You guys have been really great about finding texture all over your house. My favorite one I think that was used was a pill bottle cap for texture. So there's all sorts of things that you guys can find. You can use a rock, you can use a stick, you could use a baseball and use the strings as your texture. I just always feel like this adds a little bit of interest to it and maybe makes it feel like you don't have to worry about it looking perfect. Okay, so I've textured my slab, and I'm going to stand that up so you can see all that nice texture. The next thing I'm going to do is carefully bend it into a cylinder. You've practiced this before because we have done it with our mug. Okay, so this is using that same construction technique as your mug. And for the sake of my demo, it was so fast you didn't see me score, slip, and seal, but I did it. Okay, so I'm just reaching in here, making sure that my seam is really nicely connected. You can see where I've done that right here. The texture looks terrible, but I'm gonna fix that. Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing on the inside, make sure that my clay is pulled back and forth over that seam so that this little guy isn't gonna fall apart when it dries. Okay, so there's that initial start. For this area, I can smooth that out with my sponge if I want to, just to make sure it looks a little bit smoother. And then since I'm adding the texture, I can use that texture roller again and just press my texture back over that spot that looks, you know, a little funky. Okay, now it matches. That's another one of the really beauties of using the texture is you don't have to work forever on getting a perfect seam. Okay, so here's a couple of options for you. First of all, if you do a good job sealing everything, so I would need to continue working right here, get all that sealed up. If you do a good job working on that, you actually don't have to add a base on here. So we did that with the mug, we added a base because obviously you don't want your coffee to fall out. For the lantern, that's not as important, okay, because the idea would be that this would go and sit over a candle, all right? So if you had to drop your candle down in there, that's a little bit harder function-wise. What you can do is make a separate base. So just like this little tray that I had, it has a couple little feet on the bottom of it. I can do that with my cylinder and make just kind of like cut around the cylinder, maybe make it, you know, half an inch wider all the way around for that little tray. Or you could make it match exactly. What's your choice? Okay, so this is going to be my cylinder for my luminary, and then this is going to be my tray that it sits on. So for that tray area, I would texture it the same, make it match my cylinder. So there's the texture, okay? And then the next thing I would do would be to flip that upside down and add some feet. So for the feet, you could roll a couple of little spheres, maybe shape them into a square or a triangle, whatever you think kind of matches the shape or design. There's a little house. So maybe that would be the shape of my feet. I would score, slip, and seal at least 3 of these on here, but maybe 4. Smooth the outside edge of this tray. Make sure it looks really nice and complete. And then this would just sit upside down to dry. If you try to flip it over to dry, it's gonna get all warped. So that little tray you can just set aside, leave it upside down. Okay, so that's that first construction piece. After you have your 2 parts constructed, now it's time to start thinking about actually carving your luminary. So this is where I would go back and put my cylinder template around my cylinder. And we're gonna use the same transfer technique that we used on the mask assignment. So for this, I'll try to show you guys here. I would just be pressing into my line. This is really hard to do upside down and backwards. And oh, it looks terrible, but you know I'm trying really hard. Okay, so I would just keep going. I'm gonna do it freehand because in this case it's gonna be easier. So I'm doing these kind of paisley designs, which I thought would be really cool. So I'll sketch one of them on here and show you. So there's my paisley shape. I have it outlined. And I'm not gonna cut that paisley out. I am going to carve into my clay so it's really defined right there. But what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna cut a couple of different sized holes inside of that big shape. So I went and grabbed, I've got this big screw, and I've got a smaller screw. I could use a nail or my pen tool. And I'm just gonna use that screw to actually punch my hole into my clay. And this works really well. So if you happen to have something like that at home, great. On the inside of that, it made a mess. So I want to try to smooth that back side of my cylinder as best I can. So there's my first hole for my luminary. With this big one, I could do another one. Punch that hole in there. I've got my smaller sized one. Maybe 2 of those. And then I probably need to find a nail or something to make my last hole a little bit smaller. Okay, so I'm gonna repeat that idea all the way around my cylinder and just try to fill it up with these holes that are getting, you know, from bigger to smaller. On the inside, let's see if you can see this here. There, you can see the mess that it makes on the inside. You have to go in and clean that up. So you need to be able to, this is another reason it's good not to put a base on these. You need to be able to get in there and smooth that clay out, because otherwise what will happen is, first of all, it's gonna get super sharp, and secondly, it's gonna block the light from shining out from your cylinder. Okay, so the inside should be nice and smooth, same as the outside. You might need to take your sponge in there and smooth that area as well. Okay, so I would continue working on that design. You guys are also, besides just putting the holes in there for the luminary or the candle to shine, like I said, you can carve into your design. So I don't want to cut out this huge paisley shape. That would be a big hole. Okay, we want smaller designs in there. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to let the clay crumbs dry and then come back in and brush that off. Okay, so that's my one pattern that I have started. I'm going to do that all the way around. So there's big ones and small ones at the top and at the bottom. And then I'm just going to let this dry. Okay. Don't let it dry out until you're done with all of your luminary patterns. Everything is nice and smooth. And really, as I've asked you to, just wait until you come to the school to take it out of the bag. All right, so if that's the option that you wanted to do, that cylinder, I think this is actually gonna turn out really cool. It's gonna have that part, it's gonna have the base, and that will meet the requirements. I will talk about adding the handle onto the top, or the loop onto the top, in the next video. Okay, option 2. Here we go. If you don't want to do this option, you can stop listening. Here's option 2. So I have made a template for this also. So I've got my piece of paper, and this one is going to take 4 slabs of clay. So I have my piece of paper, and I've already cut 2 slabs of clay. With that template, I'm going to need 4. This process is a little bit different. I did on this first one, I went ahead and transferred my design, same as what we did with the Dia de los Muertos mask. But what you also have to do on this is once you flip over your, let's move this out of the way. Once you flip your slab over, you need to bevel the edge of your clay. And so what that looks like is this, and I'll try to demo this as best I can. So I'm cutting at an angle around my clay. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see it's about a 45-degree angle. It doesn't have to be quite 45 degrees. It's gonna go all the way around. I'm gonna do that on all 4 pieces. And then we're gonna score around the edge of that and slip. And I'm gonna just do that real quick, just on 2 pieces. I'm gonna show you how to get started. And then once we get this constructed, it's gonna be the same concept as far as carving into it as I just showed you on the cylinder. Okay, so I've got my 2 pieces. They are carved with that beveled edge. This is the inside. So to construct these 2 pieces, I'm going to push them together and then curve the top. Okay, so this is gonna curve in. Ideally, with a luminary, if you have an actual candle, if you carve or if you leave that top completely closed, it's gonna put the candle out, okay? It has to have a way for that smoke to escape. So you could think about bending the top part up, or you could decide that you want to cut it as a square to go around the top. That changes the idea or the shape of it a little bit, but it could still look kind of cool. On the inside, this is a little tricky. So on the inside edge here, right in that area, you need to put a coil of clay in there, and that's what really holds these together. So you want to roll out a thin coil of clay and attach it into the inside edge of your luminary, and then press that. So you're going to kind of get rid of any idea that that was a coil and really smooth it into the exterior pieces. Okay, so that should be nice and smooth. Again, you can use your sponge to help smooth that out if you want to. It should be invisible, okay? But that's what's gonna hold your luminary together. On the outside edge, same thing. Really work to make that edge kind of disappear. So smooth it, use your sponge to make sure that that line has also disappeared, okay? Once you get the construction done on this with your 4 sides, you can do the same thing. For the base of this, I could make a square. I can transfer my design, which you can see I've transferred. On this, I would use my pin tool to cut my design. So instead of trying to do it with the holes with the screwdriver, I would be using my pin tool to cut that pattern into my clay. Okay, so I kind of cut the pattern or cut the shape, and then I pull that piece of clay out. It's just like carving pumpkins. So if you carved a pumpkin this week, you were practicing for your luminary. Okay, so there's another piece that I can pull out. I would say, again, with these, you're gonna end up with these little sharp edges of clay. You don't want that. So once you've got your pieces cut out, you're gonna take your sponge, smooth all these edges, get rid of any clay crumbs that are sticking into your lantern, because that does not look good, okay? The other thing to consider are these little tiny spaces. So see right here how thin that piece of clay is? That piece of clay is gonna dry really fast compared to this piece of clay, which is much wider. So again, with these, it's very, very important that you keep these wrapped up in plastic 100% of the time when you're not working on it, so that they don't dry too quickly. Otherwise, these pieces will crack and break. Okay, so constantly wrapped in plastic is ideal. All right, so that's kind of the getting started. You have, this version of the assignment. You have the cylinder version of the assignment. You could certainly do it as a square instead of rounding the top in. That's another version. So if you have any questions or ideas or aren't sure how to do it, just go ahead and shoot me an email. I'm happy to help. And like I said, for the next video, I'll show you how to add your handle and to finish everything up.